A single gesture can shatter a lifetime. For 24 years, Clara Jenkins had navigated a world of quiet hardship, her life a blur of lukewarm coffee and stained aprons. For 58 years, Sterling Blackwood had conquered that same world, his life a fortress of cold steel and colder transactions. They existed in different universes that happened to occupy the same city, until one Tuesday night at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. The billionaire rolled up his sleeve to check his platinum watch, and the waitress saw it. A tiny, perfect crescent moon, a birthmark she'd only ever seen in a faded photograph of a father she'd never known. The world stopped, and three words tumbled from her lips, about to detonate everything. "Sir, my father." The Obsidian Room wasn't so much a restaurant as it was a testament to power. Perched 60 floors above the glittering nervous system of New York City, its floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like a captured god. The clinking of cutlery on porcelain was a delicate, hushed percussion against the low hum of million-dollar conversations. Every surface, from the polished black marble floors to the dark mahogany tables, was designed to reflect the wealth of its patrons and to absorb the souls of those who served them. Clara Jenkins felt her soul being absorbed nightly. At 24, she wore her exhaustion like a second uniform beneath a starched white shirt and black waistcoat. Her life was a frantic, punishing rhythm: pre-dawn shifts at a greasy spoon diner in Queens, afternoon classes at a community college, and nights spent here, in this cathedral of opulence, balancing trays of seared scallops and vintage Bordeaux for people who spent more on a single meal than she made in a month. Every dollar was a soldier in the endless war against her mother's medical bills and the rent on their tiny, drafty apartment. Tonight, her station included Table 7, the most coveted and feared seat in the house. It was occupied by Sterling Blackwood. He was not just a billionaire, he was a titan, a force of nature who moved markets with a whisper and dismantled corporations with a penstroke. His face, etched with the severe lines of relentless ambition, was a fixture in financial journals. He sat alone, a stark island of intimidating silence, his presence sucking the ambient warmth from the air. Clara approached with the practiced invisibility of a seasoned waitress. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood. May I start you with something to drink? Perhaps the 1982 Petrus?" she recited, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the city below, a kingdom he surveyed with the bored indifference of a king, long past his days of conquest. "Sparkling water, no ice, and bring me the market analysis report I requested your manager hold for me." His voice was gravel, cold and devoid of any human inflection. "Of course, sir." She retrieved the water and the leather-bound folder, placing them on the table with a surgeon's precision. For the next hour, she existed only in his periphery, a ghost materializing to refill his glass or clear a plate. He devoured a dry-aged steak with brutal efficiency, his eyes never leaving the documents spread before him. Clara watched him, a specimen from another species. What did a man like that think about? Did he feel joy? Did he remember his dreams? The moment that changed everything was mundane, almost comical in its simplicity. As he finished his meal, Sterling Blackwood, the man who commanded empires, spilled a drop of water on his French cuff. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He pushed the chair back, unfastened the diamond cufflink, and rolled up the sleeve of his bespoke shirt to inspect the fabric. And there it was, on the pale, veined skin of his inner wrist, stark against the dark dusting of hair, was a birthmark. It wasn't a speck or a mole. It was a shape, a perfect, elegant crescent moon, the color of milky coffee. Clara froze. The tray in her hand, laden with the dirty dishes of a neighboring table, trembled. Her breath hitched. The carefully constructed wall between her two lives, the weary waitress and the daughter of a ghost, crumbled into dust. In her worn wallet, tucked behind her community college ID, was a photograph. It was the only one she had. A young, smiling woman with Clara's eyes held a swaddled infant. Beside her, a man's arm was wrapped around her shoulder, his hand resting on the baby. His face was out of frame, cut off by the clumsy photography of a bygone era. But on his wrist, clearly visible, was that same mark, the crescent moon. Her mother, Evelyn, lost in the fog of a cruel neurological disease that stole her memories piece by piece, used to trace the shape in the photo with a trembling finger. "Your father," she would whisper on her good days. "Stephen. He had the moon on his wrist. Said he'd catch it for me one day." Stephen, not Sterling. But the mark, it was identical. A brand from nature, unique and undeniable. The restaurant, the city, the weight of the tray, it all faded away. There was only the man at table 7 and the impossible, cataclysmic possibility blooming in her chest. Her training screamed at her to remain silent, to disappear, to not disturb the predator in his den. But the desperate hope of a girl who had grown up with a gaping hole where a father should be was a far more powerful force. She placed the tray on a nearby stand, her movements stiff and robotic. She walked back to his table, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He was signing the bill, his signature a sharp, angry slash of ink. "Sir?" Her voice was a reedy whisper. He didn't look up. "Leave it." "Sir," she repeated, a little louder this time, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry to bother you." He finally lifted his head, his eyes the color of cold slate, meeting hers for the first time. They were utterly devoid of curiosity. He saw a servant, an interruption. "What is it?" She swallowed, her throat dry. She pointed a trembling finger towards his exposed wrist. "That mark," she breathed. "The birthmark on your wrist." His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What about it?" The words felt like stones in her mouth, heavy and jagged. "Hi, sir," she managed, the phrase sounding absurdly casual for the bombshell she was about to drop. "My father, he had the same birthmark." Sterling Blackwood stared at her. The silence that followed was absolute. He didn't laugh. He didn't ask a question. His face became a mask of impenetrable stone. But for a split second, a flicker of something unreadable. Shock, confusion, annoyance passed through his eyes. Then his expression hardened into one of pure, dismissive contempt. "Is this some kind of shakedown?" he asked, his voice lethally soft. "Did one of your tabloid reading friends put you up to this? How much do you want to go away?" The accusation was a physical blow. Tears pricked Clara's eyes, born of humiliation and the sudden, crushing weight of her own foolishness. "No," she stammered. "No, it's not like that. I have a photo. My mother." "I don't care about your mother or your photographs," he cut in, his voice like the scrape of metal on stone. He began rolling his sleeve back down, hiding the mark as if it were a shameful secret. "You have 5 seconds to get away from my table before I have you not only fired, but blacklisted from every restaurant in this city." He stood up, towering over her. He dropped a few crisp $100 bills on the table, far more than the check required, but it felt less like a tip and more like a payment for her silence, an insult. "Don't ever speak to me again," he said, turning his back on her and striding out of the restaurant without a second glance. Clara stood frozen, the entire restaurant's attention now fixed on her. The manager, a perpetually nervous man named Mr. Dubois, was already power-walking towards her, his face a mask of panic. She could feel the stares of the other patrons, hear their whispered judgments. The hope that had soared so violently in her chest just moments before had plummeted, leaving a cold, aching void. She had seen the mark, she had spoken her truth, and the only thing that had unfolded was her own professional ruin. The billionaire was gone, and she was left alone in the wreckage. The black sedan sliced through the rain-slick streets of Manhattan, a silent predator in the urban jungle. Inside, cocooned in the scent of Italian leather and the quiet hum of a perfectly engineered engine, Sterling Blackwood stared out at the blurred city lights. But he wasn't seeing them. He was seeing the face of a waitress, frightened, earnest, and utterly preposterous. His initial reaction had been pure instinctual defense. In his world, people didn't approach him with heartfelt confessions. They approached him with angles. Everyone wanted something: money, influence, a connection. The girl's story was just a more creative, more pathetic version of the usual grift. A birthmark? It was laughable. A coincidence. My father, he had the same birthmark. The words echoed in the silent car, refusing to be dismissed. He clenched his fist, the fabric of his trousers straining over his knuckles. Contempt had been his shield, but now in the solitude of his car, a hairline crack appeared in its surface. He hated the birthmark. For his entire adult life, he had viewed it as a flaw, an imperfection on an otherwise curated and controlled existence. He wore long-sleeved shirts, even in the summer, to conceal it. It was a vestige of a life he had systematically and brutally erased, a life before he was Sterling Blackwood. The car pulled up to his penthouse, a glass palace overlooking Central Park. He bypassed the doorman with a curt nod and took the private elevator straight to the top. The apartment was vast, sterile, and silent. It was a home designed by a committee of decorators to project power, not to nurture a soul. His wife, Victoria, was at a charity gala, an event he had summarily bailed on. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid sloshing against the crystal. He walked to the window, the same panoramic view he'd had from the restaurant, but from a higher, more dominant vantage point. It usually filled him with a sense of mastery. Tonight, it felt empty. He rolled up his sleeve and stared at the crescent moon on his wrist. It seemed darker tonight, more pronounced. A key to a door he had welded shut decades ago. The past came unbidden, not in a flood, but in sharp, painful fragments. He wasn't Sterling Blackwood then. He was Stephen Blake, 19 years old, with nothing to his name but a scholarship to Columbia, a worn-out jacket, and a fury to escape the grinding poverty of his childhood in Boston. And there was Evelyn. He remembered her not in crisp detail, but as a feeling, the scent of cheap shampoo and sunshine in her hair, the sound of her laughter in a cramped booth at a campus diner, the warmth of her hand in his. They had been kids, fueled by cheap coffee and the arrogant belief that their love was an indestructible force against the world. She was the only person who had ever seen the scared, ambitious boy beneath the chip on his shoulder. She'd traced the birthmark on his wrist one afternoon in the park, her touch feather-light. "It's your own private moon," she'd said, "a promise of light in the dark." The memory was so vivid it made him ache. What had happened? The narrative he had clung to for 35 years was that she had left him. He'd had to drop out of school for a semester to work. His father had a stroke, and the medical bills were crushing. He was drowning. He had returned to New York, desperate to see her, only to be told by her roommate that she was gone. Packed up and left. He wrote letters. They went unanswered. Eventually, pride and the searing pain of rejection turned his love to ash. He concluded she had wanted someone with better prospects, someone who wasn't a charity case. That betrayal became the fuel for his ascent. He changed his name, clawed his way into the world of finance, and buried Stephen Blake in his broken heart forever. But the waitress, Clara, she had Evelyn's eyes. He slammed the glass down on the marble countertop, the sound cracking the silence. "It's a scam," he growled to the empty room. "It has to be." But the seed of doubt had been planted. It was a noxious weed, its roots twisting around the foundations of the life he had so meticulously constructed. The next morning, he summoned his lawyer to his office. Arthur Vance was a man as precise and colorless as the legal documents he drafted. He had been with Sterling for 30 years, the loyal architect of his legal fortifications. "I have a delicate situation," Sterling began, pacing his office. The city sprawled beneath him. Arthur listened, his face impassive, as Sterling recounted the incident at the restaurant, editing out the emotional weight and presenting it as a potential security threat. "A young woman, a waitress, approached me. She made a claim of a familial connection based on a distinguishing mark. It's an obvious play for money. And you want me to make it go away," Arthur stated, more of a conclusion than a question. "A cease and desist? A quiet settlement with a non-disclosure agreement?" "I want you to find out who she is," Sterling said, his voice sharper than he intended. "Her name is Clara Jenkins. Find out everything. Where she lives, who her mother is, where she came from. I want to know what I'm dealing with. I want leverage." Arthur made a note on a legal pad. "Consider it done. We'll have a file on her by the end of the day. Most likely a small-time grifter with a history of nuisance claims." "Good," Sterling said, the words sounding hollow. But as Arthur left, Sterling found himself walking to the hidden safe behind a minimalist painting in his office. He entered the combination, his fingers surprisingly stiff. Inside, beneath stacks of bearer bonds and property deeds, was a small, worn wooden box. He hadn't opened it in over 3 decades. He lifted the lid. Inside was a single dog-eared photograph, a young Stephen Blake grinning, his arm around a laughing Evelyn, and a cheap silver locket she had given him, with a tiny, poorly etched crescent moon on it. He stared at the photo of the woman he had loved, the woman who had shattered him. Then he thought of the waitress, of her desperate, pleading eyes. Eyes that were an exact echo of the ones in the photograph. The doubt was no longer a seed. It was a living, breathing thing, and it was tearing him apart. He had built his empire on the bedrock of her betrayal. But what if the bedrock was sand? What if, for 35 years, he had been wrong? The thought was more terrifying than any market crash or hostile takeover he had ever faced. The termination was as swift and impersonal as a guillotine. Mr. Dubois called Clara into his office the next morning, avoiding her gaze as he slid a pale pink envelope across his desk. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said, his voice laced with the insincere regret of a man following orders. "We have a standard of conduct. Mr. Blackwood is our most important client. An incident was reported. My hands are tied." "I was just asking a question," Clara said, her voice small. The fight had gone out of her last night, replaced by a cold, leaden dread. "To a man like that, a question from a person like you is an accusation." "It's harassment," he said, the class distinction hanging nakedly in the air. "Your final paycheck is in the envelope. Please clear out your locker." She walked out of the obsidian room for the last time, the morning sun feeling harsh and alien. The loss of the job was catastrophic. It was the highest paying of her 3, the one that kept the lights on and paid for the specialized medication her mother needed. Now the fragile scaffolding of her life was about to collapse. Days turned into a week of frantic, fruitless searching. Every restaurant she applied to seemed to have an opening until they called her references. The name Blackwood was a silent poison, rendering her untouchable. Desperation began to gnaw at her. The eviction notice taped to her apartment door was no longer a threat, it was a promise. One rainy afternoon, huddled in her small living room, the smell of damp and decay clinging to the air, she decided to go through her mother's old things. She was looking for a social security card, a birth certificate, anything that might help her apply for emergency aid. In the back of a dusty closet was a large battered shoebox held together with yellow tape. Inside was a lifetime of memories that Evelyn's mind could no longer hold. There were dried flowers, a ticket stub from a concert in 1989, and a stack of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Clara's hands trembled as she untied it. The letters were from her mother, addressed to a Stephen Blake at an address in Boston. They were never sent. The envelopes were still sealed. She opened the first one, dated a month after Clara was born. "My dearest Stephen, I don't know if you'll ever get this. I don't even know if you're still there. I came back to New York and you were gone. They said your father was sick. I hope he's okay. Stephen, something wonderful has happened. We have a daughter. I named her Clara. She's so beautiful, and she has your serious little frown when she sleeps. I look at her and I see you. I know things were a mess when you left, but please come back. I love you. We need you." Clara read on, letter after letter, a chronicle of hope fading into despair. Evelyn wrote about getting a job, about Clara's first smile, about how she'd had to move to a cheaper apartment. The letters became more frantic, more desperate. "Stephen, it's been a year. Are you getting my letters? I keep sending them to your parents' house, but they always come back. Did I do something wrong? Please, just let me know you're alive." Clara said a word today. She pointed at the moon and said, "Dada, my heart is breaking." The final letter was written 2 years later. The handwriting was shaky, stained with what looked like teardrops. "I have to stop. I can't do this anymore. I have to believe you left for a reason, that you didn't want us. It's the only way I can keep going for her. I will always love the boy who promised me the moon, but I have to let him go. Goodbye, Stephen." Tucked at the bottom of the box was the original photograph, the one she carried a copy of. On the back, in her mother's elegant script, it said, Stephen and Evelyn, Central Park, 1988. The day he gave me the locket. Clara sat on the floor, the letters spread around her, and wept. She wept for her mother's broken heart, for the years of struggle, for the father who had seemingly vanished. Sterling Blackwood was Stephen Blake. The timing, the story, the mark, it all fit. He hadn't just left, he had erased himself, changed his name, and built a new world on the ashes of the old one, leaving them behind to burn. The humiliation she felt at the restaurant curdled into a hard, cold anger. This wasn't about his money. This was about the truth. This was about the lifetime of pain he had caused. Meanwhile, in a sleek, anonymous office in Midtown, Genevieve Reed stared at her computer screen. She was a private investigator, one of the best in the city. Her clients were the ultra-rich, and her currency was discretion and dirt. Sterling Blackwood's request, filtered through his lawyer, Arthur Vance, was typical. Investigate a potential nuisance. But as Genevieve started digging, the word nuisance felt increasingly inadequate. Clara Jenkins was clean, squeaky clean. No criminal record, no history of scams, no social media presence to speak of. Just a trail of hard work and bad luck. The real story began when she started investigating Clara's mother, Evelyn Jenkins. Genevieve found her in a state-run nursing home in the Bronx, a place that smelled of disinfectant and despair. The diagnosis was frontotemporal dementia, aggressive and advanced. Her medical file was a litany of financial hardship. The key came from a deep-dive archival search, cross-referencing property records and old phone books from the late 1980s. She found an old address for Evelyn, and from there, a former roommate, a woman now living in Arizona. A 1-hour phone call, coaxed by Genevieve's disarming charm and a hint of financial compensation, opened the first door. The roommate remembered Stephen Blake, the intense, brilliant boyfriend from Colombia, and she remembered when he disappeared. Evelyn was heartbroken, the woman said over the phone. But then this other man started showing up. Older, wealthy. His daughter was one of Evelyn's friends, said he was a family friend, just checking in on her. He's the one who told Evelyn that Stephen had met someone else in Boston from a rich family and wanted nothing to do with her or the baby. Did this man have a name? Genevieve asked, her pen poised. Oh yeah, a real piece of work. Always wore these stuffy suits. His name was Robert Croft. His daughter was Victoria Croft. Genevieve's blood ran cold. Victoria Croft. Now Victoria Blackwood. Sterling Blackwood's wife of 32 years. The pieces began to click into place with terrifying speed. Genevieve shifted her investigation from Clara to Victoria. She pulled financial records, family histories, timelines. Sterling Blackwood's meteoric rise hadn't been a solo act. His first major investment, the one that launched his career, came from a seed fund managed by Croft Enterprises. He had married the boss's daughter. The final piece of the puzzle was the hardest to get. It required hacking into the digitized archives of a long-defunct mail forwarding service and bribing a retired postal worker. But she found it, a record of dozens of letters addressed to Stephen Blake at his family's Boston address, all returned to sender. And then a change of service request, signed and paid for by Robert Croft, instructing that any further mail from Evelyn Jenkins's address be redirected to a P.O. box that was closed a year later. The letters were intercepted. All of them. Genevieve leaned back in her chair, the full, monstrous picture coming into focus. This wasn't a coincidence or a grift. It was a conspiracy, a decades-long deception orchestrated by Sterling's wife and father-in-law. They hadn't just profited from Stephen Blake's disappearance, they had engineered it. They had buried him, silenced Evelyn, and built an empire on top of their lies. She picked up the phone to call Arthur Vance. You're not going to believe this, she said, her voice grim. This isn't about the waitress. This is about the wife. Arthur Vance listened to Genevieve Reed's report in his soundproof office, the skyline a silent, gray witness. As she laid out the timeline, the intercepted letters, the lies fed to both a young Stephen Blake and a pregnant Evelyn Jenkins, the timely investment from Robert Croft, Arthur felt a profound chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. He had served Sterling Blackwood for 3 decades, admiring the man's ruthless genius and unwavering self-creation. Now he was learning that the very foundation of his client's life was a meticulously crafted lie. He hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time, the damning report on his desk feeling radioactive. His duty was to protect Sterling. But what did that mean now? Protecting him from a gold-digging waitress was one thing. Protecting him from the truth of his own marriage, from the woman who slept in his bed, was something else entirely. It was an attack from within the fortress. He knew he couldn't hide this. Sterling was not a man who tolerated being managed, and the truth, however destructive, was a variable that had to be controlled. He picked up his phone and dialed Sterling's private line. "I have the report on the Jenkins girl," Arthur said, his voice carefully neutral. "But it's complicated. You need to see this in person." Sterling arrived at the law office within the hour. He exuded his usual aura of impatient authority, but Arthur could see the strain around his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw. The seed of doubt was taking its toll. "So?" Sterling demanded, forgoing any pleasantries as he took a seat opposite Arthur's desk. "Is she a fraud?" Arthur slid the file across the polished wood. "She's not a fraud, Sterling. She is very likely your daughter." Sterling's face remained impassive, but a muscle feathered in his cheek. He opened the file. He saw copies of Clara's birth certificate, listing father unknown. He saw records of her hardscrabble life, the jobs, the student loans, the mounting medical debt for her mother, Evelyn. He saw a photo of Evelyn Jenkins, taken last week at the nursing home. The vibrant girl from his memories was gone, replaced by a frail, hollow-eyed woman lost to the ravages of time and illness. A pang of something sharp and painful shot through him. Then he got to Genevieve's summary of the deception. He read about Robert Croft's interference, about the lies told to Evelyn. He saw the documentation for the mail redirection, a cold, bureaucratic record of a life-altering betrayal. Finally, he saw the name Victoria Croft, his wife, tied inextricably to the entire scheme. The silence in the room stretched, taut and thin. Sterling read the final page, then read it again, his mind struggling to process the sheer scale of the treachery. He had built his world on the belief that Evelyn had abandoned him, that pain had been the engine of his ambition, the justification for his ruthlessness. He had become Sterling Blackwood because he believed love was a transaction and trust was for fools. Now he was the fool. He slowly closed the file, his movements deliberate, almost unnaturally calm. "She knew," he said, his voice flat, a quiet, deadly thing. "Victoria, she knew the entire time." "It appears so," Arthur said softly. "Her father told Evelyn you had moved on. It's likely he told you a similar story about her." Sterling remembered. He had been a wreck, working 2 jobs in Boston, his father fading in a hospital bed. Robert Croft, his girlfriend Victoria's imposing father, had taken him out for a drink. He'd been kind, paternal. He'd said he had a friend in New York who'd heard Evelyn was seeing a new man, someone with money. He'd said it with sympathy, advising the young Stephen to forget her and focus on his future, a future that Robert and Victoria could help him build. It had been the final nail in the coffin of his hope. The calm on Sterling's face finally shattered. He stood up and swept his arm across Arthur's desk, sending papers, a lamp, and a carafe of water crashing to the floor. The sound was explosive in the quiet room. 35 years, he roared, his voice raw with a pain he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. 35 years of my life. My daughter. I have a daughter who has struggled for everything while I... He couldn't finish the sentence. The enormity of it was suffocating. His child had been waiting tables for him, and he had threatened her, humiliated her. He looked at Arthur, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying fire. "Where is she?" "At a gala for the Children's Health Foundation," Arthur said, already anticipating the question. "At the museum." Sterling turned and strode out of the office without another word. Arthur Vance watched him go, knowing he was about to witness the controlled demolition of the Blackwood Empire. Not from a market crash, but from the simple, devastating power of the truth. Sterling wasn't just going to confront his wife. He was going to war with the very lie his life had been built upon. The charity gala was a shimmering tableau of New York's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over women in designer gowns and men in tailored tuxedos. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of forced laughter. Victoria Blackwood moved through it all like a queen in her court. Regal, elegant, and perfectly composed, she was the embodiment of old money and untouchable status. She was accepting an award on behalf of the Blackwood Foundation, the philanthropic arm of their empire that polished their public image. She was mid-sentence with a senator when she saw him. Sterling was standing at the grand entrance to the ballroom, not in a tuxedo, but in the suit he'd been wearing all day. He was a thundercloud in a room of champagne bubbles, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't move. He just stood there, his eyes locked on her. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Victoria excused herself, her smile never faltering, though a knot of ice was forming in her stomach. She glided towards him, her expression one of wifely concern. "Sterling, darling, what's wrong? You look awful." "We're leaving," he said, his voice low and guttural. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm being honored in 20 minutes. "The honor has been revoked," he said, taking her arm in a grip that was painfully tight. He propelled her through the gawking crowd, past the stunned event organizers, and out into the cold night air where his car waited, engine running. The ride back to the penthouse was a symphony of suffocating silence. Victoria tried to ask what was happening, but he cut her off with a look so venomous it silenced her. When they entered the apartment, he didn't turn on the main lights, leaving the vast space illuminated only by the cold, impersonal glow of the city outside. He threw the file from Arthur's office onto the glass coffee table. The sound was like a gunshot. "Explain this." Victoria stared at the file, then at his face. The pretense fell away, replaced by a flicker of fear, quickly masked by defiance. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Evelyn Jenkins," Sterling snarled, the name feeling like acid on his tongue. "Stephen Blake, intercepted letters. Do I need to continue, or has your memory suddenly failed you?" Victoria paled. She sank onto the sofa, her composure finally cracking. "My father," she began. "It was his idea. He was protecting our future." "Protecting?" Sterling laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You call this protecting? You built our entire life on a foundation of lies. You let me believe she abandoned me. You let me believe I didn't have a child." "She was nobody," Victoria shot back, her voice rising with a shrill, defensive anger. "A poor student from nowhere. She would have been an anchor, dragging you down, holding you back from everything you were meant to be. My father saw your potential. I saw it. We gave you the world." "You stole my world," he roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "You stole my daughter. Did you ever stop to think what happened to them? Did you ever once in 32 years of marriage feel a shred of guilt while you wore your jewels and planned your parties, knowing my child was out there, struggling?" "She wasn't your child in any meaningful way," Victoria insisted, standing up, her fear transmuting into the righteous indignation of the privileged. "She was a consequence of a foolish, juvenile affair. We made you into Sterling Blackwood. That name, this life, you owe it all to me and my father." That was the moment he broke. The cold fury dissolved into a profound, gaping wound of grief. "My name," he whispered, his voice cracking, "was Stephen Blake, and I think he was a better man than this." He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in years, and saw not a partner, but a parasite, a woman whose love was not a gift, but a cage gilded with gold. "Get out," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "What?" "Pack a bag. Call your lawyer. I want you out of my house by morning. The marriage is over." "You can't be serious," she scoffed, though panic was clear in her eyes. "Sterling, think of the scandal, the business. The business is mine," he said with chilling finality. "The lies were yours. Get out." He turned his back on her and walked towards the window, leaving her standing alone amidst the ruins of their life. At that same moment, across the city in the bleak nursing home in the Bronx, Clara sat by her mother's bedside. The eviction notice felt like a lead weight in her pocket. She had come to say goodbye, to tell her mother they would have to move, though she knew the words would likely not be understood. Evelyn was having a rare, lucid evening. The fog in her eyes had cleared, and she looked at Clara with a glimmer of recognition. "My sweet girl," Evelyn whispered, her hand thin as a bird's claw, reaching for Clara's. "You look so tired." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "I'm okay, Mom." "I was dreaming," Evelyn said, her gaze drifting towards the window. "About the park, with Stephen." Clara's heart seized. She leaned in closer. "What did you dream, Mom?" "He gave me a locket," she murmured, a faint smile touching her lips, "with a moon on it. He said he had one too, a real one, given to him by an angel. He promised he'd always come back." Her eyes focused on Clara with a sudden, startling intensity. "The crescent moon. Did you find it?" The question, so direct and clear, shattered the last of Clara's composure. She began to sob, resting her head on the thin mattress, her mother's frail hand stroking her hair. "It's okay, baby," Evelyn whispered, her own mind beginning to drift again. "The moon always comes back, even after the darkest night." In that moment, holding her mother's hand, Clara knew what she had to do. This was no longer about a billionaire who had wronged her. It was about giving her mother one last piece of peace. It was about showing a man named Stephen Blake what he had truly lost. Not a fortune, not an empire, but the simple, irreplaceable love of the woman who still dreamt of him after all these years. Sterling Blackwood drove through the night, the city lights a meaningless smear. Victoria was gone, a ghost already being exorcised by her lawyers. The penthouse felt like a tomb. He had spent the last few hours with Arthur, setting in motion the ironclad machinery of a divorce that would be brutal and swift. But none of that mattered. He had one goal now. He had Clara's address, a rundown apartment building in Queens, courtesy of Genevieve's file. It was a part of the city he hadn't set foot in for decades. As he pulled his Bentley onto the cracked, litter-strewn street, it felt like traveling to a foreign country. He looked out of place, a shark in a fishbowl, and he knew it. He found her apartment, number 3B. The door was thin, the paint peeling. He could hear a faint sound of crying from within. For a moment, the titan of industry hesitated. What could he possibly say? "I'm sorry, my wife's family conspired to ruin your mother's life and steal you from me, and I was too blind and arrogant to ever look back." He knocked. The sound was too loud in the quiet, grim hallway. The crying stopped. After a long moment, the door opened a crack, held by a chain. Clara peered out, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. When she saw him, her face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, fear, and then a flash of pure, unadulterated anger. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Clara," he began, the name feeling unfamiliar and precious. May I please come in? We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about," she shot back. "You made your position very clear at the restaurant. Now please leave before I call the police." She tried to shut the door, but he put his hand against it. It wasn't a gesture of force, but of pleading. "Please," he said, and the word was raw, stripped of all his usual authority. It was the voice of Stephen Blake. "I know everything about the letters, about my wife, about her father. I was wrong. God, I was so wrong." His words and the genuine anguish in his voice made her pause. She saw the eviction notice on the table behind her. She had nothing left to lose. With a weary sigh, she slid the chain off and opened the door. The apartment was tiny and threadbare, but impeccably clean. It smelled of lemon polish and boiled cabbage. It was a home built on love and sheer willpower. He saw the stack of medical bills on the counter, the well-worn textbooks for her college classes. He saw the shoebox of her mother's letters sitting on the coffee table. The evidence of the life he had missed, the struggles he had been oblivious to, was all around him. It was a physical indictment. "They lied to me, Clara," he said, his voice hoarse. "They told me your mother left me for someone else. I believed them. I let my pride and my anger blind me, and I never looked back. There is no excuse for that. None. But I need you to know, I didn't know you existed. I swear on my life, I never knew." Clara stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. All she saw was a broken, older man, his carefully constructed world shattered around him. The anger in her heart didn't vanish, but it made room for a sliver of something else, a weary, painful understanding. She's sick, Clara said flatly. My mother. She has dementia. She barely knows who I am most days. Sterling flinched as if struck. I know. The report, it said. Where is she? A nursing home in the Bronx. The kind of place you pay for when you have nothing. He took a step closer. Take me to her, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Please, I need to see her. The drive to the nursing home was as silent and heavy as the one he'd shared with Victoria, but this silence was filled with the weight of unspoken grief, not rage. Clara gave directions in a monotone, her gaze fixed on the window. They arrived at the facility after visiting hours, but a call from Arthur Vance to the director and the unspoken promise of a generous donation cleared the way. The hallways were dimly lit, the air sterile. They found Evelyn's room at the end of a long corridor. She was asleep, her breathing shallow. The moonlight from the window fell across her face, making her look fragile and ethereal. Sterling stopped in the doorway, his hand gripping the frame. This frail woman was the vibrant, laughing girl from his memories. The chasm of 35 years had never seemed so vast and cruel. He slowly walked to her bedside. Clara stood back, watching him. He reached out a trembling hand, hesitating before gently touching her hair. At his touch, Evelyn's eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy, unfocused. She stared at him without recognition. Evelyn, he whispered, his voice breaking. It's me. It's Stephen. Her gaze remained distant. She seemed to look right through him. Heartbreak washed over Sterling's face. He was too late. The woman he had loved was gone, a prisoner in her own mind. He sank into the chair beside her bed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He took her frail hand in his. I'm so sorry, Ev, he murmured, tears streaming down his face, the first tears he had shed since he was a boy. I'm so sorry. I should have come back. I should have fought for you. As he spoke, he unconsciously turned his hand, and the pale skin of his wrist caught the moonlight. The crescent moon was clearly visible. Evelyn's cloudy eyes suddenly focused. Her gaze dropped from his face to his wrist. Her fingers, surprisingly strong, tightened on his. A flicker of light, of memory, sparked deep within her eyes. Stephen, she whispered, her voice a dry rasp, but it was clear. You came back. A faint, beautiful smile touched her lips. You caught the moon for me. She squeezed his hand, her eyes locking with his, a moment of pure, unadulterated recognition across the barren wasteland of her disease. Then, as quickly as it came, the light faded, her eyes clouded over again, and her hand went slack in his. But the smile remained. Sterling sat there, holding her hand, his body shaking with silent sobs. He had been given a gift, one moment of grace, one instant where the past and present converge, and he was forgiven. Clara watched from the doorway, tears rolling down her own cheeks. This wasn't about money or revenge anymore. It was about closing a circle of pain that had stretched for decades. In the quiet, sterile room, amidst the wreckage of 3 lives, a father and daughter finally truly met for the first time. The DNA test that Arthur Vance had already arranged was now just a formality. The truth was here, in this room, held in the space between a sleeping woman's smile and a broken man's tears. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change, as swift and decisive as one of Sterling's corporate takeovers, but driven by a purpose he hadn't felt in years. Evelyn was moved from the Bronx nursing home to a private, world-class neurological care facility in Connecticut. Sterling spared no expense, hiring the best doctors, therapists, and specialists. Her lucid moments remained fleeting and rare, but her comfort and dignity were, for the first time, assured. He spent hours by her bedside each day, sometimes reading to her, sometimes just sitting in silence, holding her hand, content to be the quiet guardian of her peace. He formally acknowledged Clara as his daughter. There was no quiet settlement, no hushed agreement. He called a press conference, a move that stunned the financial world and horrified his soon-to-be ex-wife's social circle. Standing before the cameras, he was not the ruthless Sterling Blackwood, but a humbled man. He told a redacted but honest version of the story, of a lost love, a terrible misunderstanding, and the recent discovery of a daughter he never knew he had. He introduced Clara, who stood beside him, poised and resolute, bearing the scrutiny with a strength that made him prouder than any billion-dollar deal ever had. Life for Clara transformed overnight, but not in the ways a fairy tale might dictate. She didn't move into the penthouse or go on a wild shopping spree. She insisted on finishing her semester at community college. The eviction notice was a memory, her mother's bills were gone, but she was determined to build a life on her own terms, not just as an extension of his. The relationship between them was a delicate, fragile thing, taking its first tentative steps. There were no grand, cinematic moments of bonding. Instead, their connection was built in the small, quiet spaces. They met for coffee near her campus, the billionaire sitting awkwardly in a plastic chair, listening as she talked about her classes. They walked through Central Park, the same park where he had courted her mother, and she told him stories of Evelyn, filling in the 35-year gap with anecdotes of a woman he now only knew through a fog of illness. He learned about her resilience, her fierce independence, her quiet compassion. She learned about the driven, wounded young man he once was, the Stephen Blake who still existed beneath the armor of Sterling Blackwood. They found their common ground not in the present, but in the past, in their shared love for Evelyn. The divorce from Victoria was surgically precise and devastatingly effective. Stripped of the Blackwood name and a significant portion of her wealth by a prenuptial agreement Arthur Vance had drafted with prophetic genius, she became a social pariah, a living testament to the fact that money cannot buy immunity from consequence. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sterling and Clara stood on the balcony of the new foundation he had established in Evelyn's name, dedicated to funding research into neurological disorders and providing support for low-income families with ailing relatives. "She would have loved this," Clara said, looking out over the city. "I know," Sterling replied, his voice soft. "She was always the one who wanted to fix things." He turned to her, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "You're a lot like her." He rolled up his sleeve, no longer hiding the crescent moon on his wrist. It was a part of him he now accepted, a map that had, against all odds, led him back home. "I can't get back the years we lost, Clara," he said, his voice thick with a regret that would likely never fully fade. "But I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn the ones we have left." Clara looked at this man, her father, and for the first time, she didn't just see a billionaire or a symbol of a painful past. She saw Stephen, a man who had lost his way and was finally, painstakingly, finding his way back. She smiled and for the first time took his hand. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a beginning, and for both of them, it was more than they had ever dared to hope for. And so, a story that began with a spilled glass of water and a shocking revelation found its conclusion not in a courtroom or a boardroom, but in the quiet, steady work of rebuilding a family. It's a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how long it's buried, will always fight its way to the surface. The lives of Clara, Sterling, and Evelyn were forever changed, a testament to the fact that it's never too late to right a wrong, and that the most valuable inheritances aren't stocks or properties, but the chance for connection and forgiveness. Their journey was just beginning, a difficult but hopeful path to healing the wounds of the past. If this story of incredible twists, deep-seated secrets, and the unbreakable bond of family moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a powerful real-life drama, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.